All right. How you doing, Ellie?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Eric.
Hey, thank you for being available this morning for pre-recorded artist talk for Recovery ACT, Arts, Culture, and Technology. That's showcasing now at Joyce Gordon Gallery. Um, so, can you start off just kind of giving us a little bit about your background and how you got started in your art practice?
Sure. Well, I've been making art for as long as I can remember in some form or another. So I would like to tell you about my early life experience because that directly influenced what kind of work I do today. So I was born in San Jose, California, and raised in the community called Japantown. And let me tell you that the valley that I grew up in was not Silicon Valley. It wasn't even an idea in someone's brain yet. But it was a rich agricultural area with fruit orchards and beautiful small farms. And I was born a few years after the end of World War II. And my parents were just returning to San Jose after being rounded up and imprisoned by the US government in American concentration camps, along with about 120,000 other Japanese Americans. And you can imagine the kind of racism they experienced when they came back to their home, um, even though they were born and raised in California in San Francisco.
Exactly.
But one blessing that we had was that my dad's parents lived with us. And so when my folks went to work, my grandparents took care of me and my sisters. And that was when I got exposed to art and my own culture, because both my grandparents were very creative types. They were artistic. My grandmother was a floral artist. She taught flower arranging and she designed Western style clothing and big hats and also Japanese kimono. My grandfather had been a photographer most of his life, and he loved painting and doing calligraphy with a brush. So I was exposed to that. Of course, my grandmother taught me how to sew. She taught me about textile arts, and that inspired me to later learn more about world textiles. And then I developed a kinship to pre-Columbian folk art and weaving. So I studied textile art, fiber arts, and I traveled to some of the weaving centers like Guatemala and Peru and Mexico in my 20s. So all of this influenced and shaped my art aesthetic and my worldview. So then, as far as my political education, that was shaped by my involvement with the political movement struggles of the late 60s. And as you know, that was on the backdrop of the civil rights era, the Black Power and Third World Liberation movements of that time. And when I moved to Oakland in 1986, my art had become more politically charged, and I would say it became an expression of my politics. So I started to address issues like the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans, of course, in World War II, the genocide of indigenous people, and other acts of social injustice. So in the early 1990s, I started to show my art more publicly in different venues, galleries, museums. And in fact, many of those places are still surviving today, like SOMARTS and the Mission Cultural Center, Berkeley Arts Center, Fort Mason, the Oakland Museum of Art, the Jamaica Arts Center in New York, in Queens, New York. I had my work shown there too in the 90s. So my materials have changed throughout the years, but I still consider myself a mixed media artist. And it wasn't until 2014 when I started to explore the hand cut paper process. And that was, I was inspired by the form that's used in Mexico traditionally. And so that brings me to one of my earlier pieces, which, Nye, if you could put up the first slide. I created this one in 2014, and this one is called 100 Unarmed African Americans Killed by Police in 2014. So I had just returned to the States later in that year, and I felt overwhelmed and kind of bombarded by all the news about more and more killings of unarmed African Americans to police violence. This was soon after Michael Brown had been killed in Ferguson, and I felt like I needed to respond in some way. I needed to address this in my art. So I did some research. I found 100 names of African American women and men who were killed that year. And I got a piece of black paper and I started cutting with my blade, and I cut 100 names in one sheet of black paper. And in 2016, I was very honored to have that piece included in the Oakland Museum show that was commemorating the 50-year anniversary of the Black Panther Party. So, so I was very pleased for that. So this, I can continue. Shall I show the two pieces that I have in your exhibit now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just keep going. I'm on a roll. So the first of the two pieces in your show is called Unity. And in 2017, I created this cutout for an exhibition curated by the Asian American Women Artists Association, of which I'm a proud member, honoring the legacy of Yuri Kochiyama, who passed away in 2014 at the age of 93. And even though I know probably most of your audience knows about the history of Yuri Kochiyama, I would like to talk a little bit about achievements. Yeah, and I think it's really important for people to learn as much as they can. So Yuri Kochiyama was a Japanese American activist and civil rights leader. She began her life much like many other second generation Japanese Americans, but her life took a major turn after she and her family were incarcerated, like my family were during World War II. This experience changed and politicized her and moved her toward a life fighting for justice and equality for marginalized people. After the war, when she and her family moved to Harlem in New York City, she not only worked with Malcolm X in the Organization of Afro-American Unity and in the Black Liberation Movement, but also in the struggle for Puerto Rican independence, Japanese American reparations, fighting for freedom of political prisoners, and on countless other fronts for social and racial justice. And with my generation of Asian Americans, when we became woke during the political movements of the 60s and 70s, we looked up to Yuri as a role model. But through the years, she also became an inspiration to a broad community of activists and leaders of many ages and backgrounds. So this piece pays tribute to her words, and it's an excerpt from her speech entitled Mothers and Daughters from 1998. So in the white section of this piece, I cut out part of the text, and I think maybe the next detail can show you a close-up. And in the center, you could see a black circle. I painted a circle, and I chose this shape because it has been used by many cultures as a universal symbol to represent the ongoing energy found in nature, a kind of sacred space. And since Yuri stressed the importance of being unified to strengthen our fight for justice, I cut out the word unity translated into 63 languages. So I think one of the
Wow.
details can show you a little closer what some of the words are. You may recognize a few of them.
Oh, yeah. I recognize Asada Tagalog and a few other ones I was able to kind of interpret. And we can drop it in later too.
Okay,
So no
that's
worries.
great.
Yep.
Okay, and then I have one last piece I could say a few words about, and the last one is called, I call it No, Yes, See. And this one I dedicate to 43 students from southern Mexico. They were at the Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College, and they were abducted and disappeared in 2014. Their families, friends, and human rights groups are still trying to get the government to find the truth and bring the perpetrators to justice. While I was staying in Oaxaca shortly after this occurred, there were constant protests on the streets and thousands of people, just like what's happening today all over this country and all over the world. And I just was moved to make this piece and just sort of boiling down the conflict into these, 3 words. And so the main takeaway from this piece is that, especially today, we must make sure that the voice of the people prevails. So thank you for
Oh,
listening.
great, great. And then I wanted to also ask you, and maybe I missed this, your process in actually creating it, because it's just amazing amount of detail and the precision and just even mapping out how you're going to execute it.
Right.
It's-
It's actually, I found my own technique that made it easier to transfer my design onto the final black paper. And I draw my design on a big sheet of tracing paper first. And that actually, coming up with my design and drawing it takes probably most of the time. And once I start cutting, it's just sort of a meditative process of, following, the design that I've already laid out. So people always ask how long it takes, and it does vary from piece to piece, but I'm pretty fast, and I haven't cut myself yet, knock on wood.
oh, that's good.
I'm very careful when I have that blade in my hand, but it's an X-Acto knife, so I have to be careful. But yeah, basically it's just being careful, and I just sort of zone out and do each stroke one at a time, and I don't rush. So it's
Wow.
enjoyable. Not everyone, but
Yeah. So I have another question for you. What does recovery mean to you? It could be history, it could be personal, but just kind of tell us what recovery means to you.
well, you had laid out certain words like history, all of those. I think it's all a combination, because recovery to me means healing. And I,
Mhm.
like, right now we're trying to heal ourselves individually, but we're really trying to heal the community. And but first, I feel like it's up to the individual to work on ourselves, learn about our history if we can, as much as possible, and
Exactly.
learn individual history. But the history at large, because as we're finding out, you know, there have been a lot of lies and a lot of left out history. And
Exactly.
right, so I think that is really foremost. And then I really also feel like while you learn about history in general, learning about people and our past leaders, present leaders who have dedicated their lives, you know, people like Yuri Kochiyama or Congressman John Lewis, or, you know, there are numerous people who struggled and had to just keep, you know, forging along. And I think we can learn a lot from those people, from their, what they can teach us through their actions. So
Hmm.
that's another part that I feel how we can reach a form of recovery.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned it because I think it's very important that we really learn our own history, but also kind of learn others' history and kind of understand their struggles too. And it's funny, I had a young man come in, him and his mother came and bought something from a pop-up shop. And somehow we brought up Frank Ogawa, who the plaza that our city hall is named after. And he was like, "Yeah, I read his statement next to his bus," and I was like, and I had to commend him because most people, you know, I tell them about Frank Ogawa and nobody knows who he is, and they dub it as Oscar Grant Plaza, which is fine, you know, whoever want to call it whatever they want. But for me, I never call it Oscar Grant Plaza. I call Fruitvale Bart Plaza Oscar Grant Plaza. And I've been talking with Bart, like, you guys need to name the Bart at least partially after Oscar Grant, because that's where his life was taken. That's where his life need to be remembered.
Right.
But however, Frank Ogawa, when I tell people about it, it's like they don't know who he is. And then when I share with them about, I'm like, he's from Lodi. He's from the Bay Area. During the Japanese internment period, he got shipped to Topaz over something that had nothing to do with him just because he's Japanese American. He lost his daughter because he couldn't get medical care for her during that internment. We talked about over a 3.5 year period or so, something like that. So, and every time I share this story, and then he had to come back to the Bay Area, do his community rank his way up to city council over 30 years, longer than any city council person, and
Mm.
help strengthen the port and put Oakland on the international map with the sister city relationship. And so I'm like, this guy did a lot for Oakland. So please kind of do your homework and learn the history of these people. It's not just some statue sitting in the plaza. Kind of learn different people's history so you can respect it. And the same with Thomas L. Berkeley. These are not just street names. That's named
Mhm.
after a black man that started a newspaper that's still running to this day. He's historically played a role in strengthening the Port of Oakland and many other things. So, like he said, it's just like that, knowing that history and not starting with your own, but kind of take interest in learning other people's history so you know how to properly approach them and respect their legacies also. So I'm
Mm.
so glad that you mentioned that part about just taking the time to kind of learn our own personal histories, but history at large. So
Right.
thank you for that.
Sure. Good
Yep,
point.
yep. I think my one last question is if you can share with us your how can people follow you? Are you on Facebook? What's your website? Let us know where we can see more of your work.
Well, people get on me all the time because I don't have a website. And anyway,
But you can be
well,
found.
I know I'm hiding out. So um, have I do have it's a limited artist page um, on the website of the Asian American Women Artists Association. But these are like long links, so I don't know what the easiest way should they, you know what I mean? Um,
Or what's the website, and then they could just track your name under it, maybe?
Okay, so the website is aawaa.net.
Okay, great. And they just look for Ellen.
Artist, and then my name, Ellen Bepp.
Okay,
and
can you spell that for us just to make sure?
So besides that, currently I'm on another virtual art exhibition, and that is under jampilgrimages.com. And then again, you just go to the gallery and look at my name. But so there's more of my other kind of work is on that page as well.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you so much. Ellen, I enjoyed this moment. Thank you for being available. Thank you for having your work in the show. You know, the Unity piece, I had to have Unity. It's like,
I know.
it was an honor to know Yuri Kochiyama. So, you know, I had to harass you for that piece. So thank you so much for being available and making your work available.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.